It's the morning of February 15th, 2011. We're at the Eagleton Institute at Rutgers University. I'm Michael Aron of NJN News, here for the Rutgers program on the governor, the Thomas H. Kane Archive. This morning we're going to talk to Jane Kenny. Jane spent 7 years inside the governor's office during the Kane administration in a variety of positions. She would later resurface in the Whitman administration as Director of Policy, Chief of Policy and Planning, and Commissioner of Community Affairs. She had some experience in the transition from Tom Kane to Jim Florio, and from Jim Florio to Christy Whitman, and we're going to hear about her career. Jane, where were you born?
Jersey City, New Jersey.
Your parents did what?
My mother went back to work when I was about 8, and she worked at what was then Jersey City State College as an administrator in the math English program, secretary, and then became an administrator. And my father, who was in the war and then National Guard and head of Hudson County Civil Defense, the National Guard was really his love, but he was a business person for an architect and engineering firm.
Kenny's a famous name in Hudson County.
We're not related. I used to think that was unfortunate, and then I was glad. But you know, there are Kennys, you never know, it might go back. But my family actually, my father's family actually came here very, very early, at the end of it's sort of 1798. There's a ship manifest with Patrick Kenny and his wife. So we weren't part of that great Irish migration, but and my mother is Italian, and both her parents came over as immigrants.
And how many sisters do you have?
2 sisters and a brother.
And where are you in the pecking order?
I'm right in the middle. I have an older sister who's an educator. She taught at Ferris High School in Jersey City for the whole time, and then she actually joined the superintendent when Rich DePatry was superintendent, because she had been on a task force with him, an education task force, and he asked her to come and assist him when he was superintendent of schools in Jersey City. That's when the state had taken over, right after. And Rich DePatry, I don't know if you remember, he worked with Saul Cooperman and Tom Kane. And Joanne got very involved. She got a higher degree and her doctorate. Now she's retired, but she teaches teachers at Georgian Court University. And my sister Camille is my youngest, the youngest in the family, and she's a Superior Court judge in Jersey City, Hudson County. My brother's an attorney. He's a partner at Clapp & Eisenberg in River Edge, and they have offices all over New York, Florida.
When did you become interested in politics and government?
Once I got there. I was going for a PhD in English literature at Rutgers, and I had finished
Where did you do your undergraduate?
At Trinity University in Washington, D.C. It was a Catholic women's college. I went to graduate school at Rutgers, and I finished all my PhD coursework, and I had been teaching, and I, for personal reasons, needed to find a job for a little while, and told the head of the English program that I needed to take a leave of absence. And 2 days later, Chris Daggett called the graduate English program at Rutgers University looking for a writer. And
what was Daggett at the time?
He was deputy chief of staff. It was before Ed came in. He had been with Tom Kane, for a long time, and they wanted, someone. He was looking for
interesting that he would call the English department rather than Eagleton or.
Well, he was looking for a writer. He was looking for someone, Tom Kane, and at that point it was, certainly a glorified person to answer letters. Not even glorified, believe me. It was. Tom Kane had decided, and it was that first year was kind of shaky. If you remember, he was in the hospital and had back trouble. He did not have a high popularity rating. In fact, I was so apolitical at the time that I didn't know who. I said, when they asked me if I'd go to this interview, I asked if he was a Republican or a Democrat. So, and I was so worried I was going to pronounce his name wrong during the interview. I know this isn't about me, but I did call a friend of mine to ask how you prepare for such an interview, and he told me to go to the library in Highland Park, where I lived, and get out this little book called The Legislative Manual, and it will tell me about state government and all the different, departments and the people that are there and what everyone does. So I went studiously and I researched and read the legislative manual, and it was kind of ironic because about 3 years later I think I had one with my name on the cover, so that was kind of funny. But I did interview with Chris Daggett, and he hired me and he put me up on the 3rd floor to answer letters, and there was just mail everywhere. It was called the mail room, and it was just totally unorganized. One of the reasons I wanted to take the job was because they said they were going to automate the governor's office. Governor Kane decided that he wanted every letter to be answered. Every single constituent deserved an answer. That was his very strong commitment, and being very committed to education and the person that he was, obviously we had to make sure the letters were correct, grammar was correct, and the letters were conveying a real message. And but it was chaos. There were just still unopened letters from the Byrne administration all over the place. It was nothing to be critical of anybody, but it was just an enormous task because people would write in and there really weren't people that were committed or resourced, given the resources to answer those letters.
Were you given the resources?
Not at first, but there was a small group of people, some of the people that had worked on his campaign, and it became clear pretty quickly that we needed some kind of organization in the office, and the letters were coded in somebody was made up some kind of code, and they would be mixed up, and everybody say, "What's this code?" And I was watching this, I couldn't believe the chaos. But at the same time, this group from outside had been contracted to set up an automated response and bring in computers, and we were supposed to go live, as they said, a year later. Because at that point, it was still typewriters, display writers. Nobody in state government really had it. They might have had a display writer, but nobody had computers, so everything was still done on the typewriter.
When did you take this job?
May 19th, 1983.
May 19th, 1983. So Tom Kean had been governor for a year and 4 months or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, Greg Stevens had just taken over as chief of staff. Greg was already there when I got there, and Chris Daggett was deputy, and Bob Grady was there. I'm trying to remember who else.
Who did you work with closely?
There was a young woman that had worked with Chris Smith that was running this mail room at the time. Her name was Elaine Spencer. She didn't stay very long. Lou Reed was somebody, an older gentleman that had worked on the campaign. Scott Calabella, who's a young man who worked he lives in Ocean County, he'd worked on the campaign. Susan Fensky, her mother is Helen Fensky, who was the deputy over at DEP. She was very close to Tom Kean. It wasn't really a place where people thought we needed resources. And I think Chris kind of had a vision that we better get this organized, and Greg had a vision about the computer, getting this computerized. But in the beginning it was very kind of, disorganized and haphazard. Was
it the Office of Constituent Relations?
No, we did that.
Oh, you created that?
Yes.
What was it, the mail room?
It was the mail room. Yes, it was the mail room. And it was interesting because I really had to just kind of do research to learn about how state government worked, but that was like boot camp. If you want to know how it works, it's really a good idea to spend a little time sort of seeing how letters get answered. And most of the letters at the time had to go out to the departments. And somebody would write in and say, please support this bill, and that would go to counsel's office, or I'm really concerned about this sewer issue in my town, and that would go over to DEP, and we'd mark it, and then it would come back, and you'd look at it, and you'd decide whether the commissioners would sign it, or if it was something for the governor's signature. And we'd put together a little mail folder every day because he wanted to see, a sort of a sprinkling of what kind of mail he got, obviously, and so, all that was, and then I remember seeing the auto pen. We used to have some fun with that. But we had this really old machine that just kind of went, to sign Thomas Kane, and it was interesting. And then, of course, if he signed a letter to some of his friends, it would just be like Tom with a little dash next to it. So you kind of learned a lot of things. But it was an amazing eye-opener for how government works. And very quickly, I realized this is a place that affects the fabric of everybody's life every single day, from the minute you open your eyes in the morning. So I got hooked pretty quickly, and then watching the master at work was pretty much of a Harvard and Yale for state government to see Tom Kane, and I would get glimpses because of the direct relationship with the mailroom at first, and then just what we were doing there in terms of forming this office where we said this is the Office of Constituent Relations and this is the place where letters are going to be answers and we're going to make sure everything that goes out is correct and you have substance in it, and we're going to make sure that Tom Kane knows. We turned it over to the kind of system. I hired somebody that was familiar with the library system, so the letters could be coded appropriately according to whatever the Dewey Decimal System or what the coding for libraries. It's not that, but you know what I mean. And we got people right out of college, either as interns in college or right out of college, that were great writers, that were really hungry and passionate about government. And a lot of them have gone on to do wonderful things. But we had this wonderful core group of young people. And we really turned it into an office that took itself seriously, not ourselves, but our work very seriously, and really cared about making sure that people got the correct answer to what they had to say, and we would provide a lot of information for the other departments, including speechwriters, or we quickly did a list of the top 10 issues of the week that we used to give Tom Kane every week. And it was like a group of really wonderful, smart young people. We worked together, we had a great time, but we worked really hard. And Tom Kane really felt that a lot of his popularity and re-election results we gave us some credit for that. People would say, I wrote to you 3 times, in the beginning, and you never answered me. And you know how much he was out there. And, once we started, it was, I wrote to you 3 times and I got 3 answers. And we'd do town meetings where he would talk to people, and then they could go to our group of people, and we'd follow up and talk to them further and
you
try to get
attended
information.
town
Oh
meetings?
Yeah.
So you got to see
saw him
Tom
in
Kane
action.
in
Yeah.
action, and what did you think of him?
I just couldn't get over how he was the. First of all, let me just back up for a minute, because I think what I saw was this tremendous growth. I mean, I saw him give speeches in the beginning, and he never seemed really comfortable. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but through really just the space of even my early time there, he just got better and better. He got more and more relaxed. He kind of really knew what he wanted to communicate to people, and he was able to do it well. And I saw that happen, in the time that I worked for him. And I also saw that he was willing to spend time with whomever. Somebody would come up to him and grab him, and we were always rushing because we were always late. Everybody was always, we were always behind. But he would stand there and talk to somebody that came up out of the audience, and nobody important, but he obviously knew everyone was important, and that's how he treated people. It was very interesting. I mean, those early years were always I was always kind of in awe of the fact that he had so much knowledge of the state and history at his fingertips when he'd be out. He was, just had a sort of a very deep knowledge of issues. He'd been doing it for a while, but he also made it appear fresh. And he really had such an incredible political sense of how to approach things, which I didn't know at the time that that's what he was doing, but I learned as I worked with him that he was very strategic.
How long did you stay in that role?
Well, until he was reelected. We formed the Office of Constituent Relations, I think, probably maybe a year. I was a year in, and then I became director of that office when we formed it. I was in that role until...
Did you suspend your PhD
Yeah.
pursuit?
Yeah.
You got
At that
sidetracked?
point, I got sidetracked, yeah. I was hooked.
Okay.
I was really hooked.
Okay. So go ahead.
And then he got reelected, and first I was appointed to be his special assistant to the chief of staff, who was then Ed McGlynn. And then he appointed me as his cabinet secretary, and he really wanted me to be the liaison with the cabinet and work on specific issues and still oversee the Office of Constituent Relations. I had to, then put one of the people that had been working with me for several years in as director, who later became his speechwriter, Mike Marr, became actually Christy Whitman's speechwriter, but worked with him on his book. But he started working with me when he was, I think, a sophomore at, trying to remember where he went, UVA? No, William and Mary. And he came to me, and he'd sit and just code things all summer, and then and all of a sudden I realized this kid is an amazing writer. And he had a great talent even then.
He wrote The Politics of Inclusion with King?
He worked with King on that, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he was one of Christy Whitman's speechwriters years later, but he worked with Kenneth Drew for many years.
Uh-huh. How do you spell his last name?
Meagher, Mike Marr. And he's Richard McCormick's speechwriter now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Huh.
So, anyway, so then, and I worked on issues like the environment. I worked on health issues for him. Liberty State Park was one of my big issues. Public-private partnerships.
Secretary?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There were certain things he asked me to do. The arts. There's a lot of stories about that, but that was his love, and there weren't a whole lot of other people in the governor's office that were interested in that.
So what did he ask you to do in the arts?
Well, he was really interested in public-private partnerships, which we've heard that a lot. But really, I don't think people really were talking about that a lot then. He wanted to see, how we could support people that were doing good things in the nonprofit world through some connections with businesses, and if the state government would sort of make it happen, get people together, get the interest aligned. I got really involved with Waterloo Village. I got really involved with the whole Liberty State Park issue, with several of the other nonprofits.
What was the issue around Liberty State Park?
What wasn't the issue?
Making it a park? Was it a
Well,
park?
do you remember? Do you remember that? Do you remember what was going on up there? Oh gosh, it was so controversial, and people somehow thought there was this pristine virgin forest that they were trying to preserve instead of land that was full of metals and needed to be cleaned up, and it would be very expensive to actually even have grass there. There were people that wanted a golf course. Excuse me, the golf course issue was still there when I got back for Christy Whitman. I couldn't believe it. It was almost, the file was almost the same because people really, it was so controversial. And then you had people like Morris Pezzin from Jersey City. We used to actually buy our Easter stuff from Pezzins and his store. And Audrey Zapp. And they had these very, very boisterous kinds of public meetings where they wanted to preserve Liberty State Park the way it was, but there really wasn't anything that you could preserve without a lot of money. I mean, as I said, it had been rail yards and a lot of contaminant site, and there needed to be a way to clean it up, and there needed to be a way for some money to be raised doing it. The marina was very controversial, to put that marina in. There's some funny stories about it, but it was very controversial, and we really felt, and a lot of people felt that here was this treasure, looking over the New York skyline, right on the Hudson River, all this land that was open, what we call now brownfields, and what could we do to have something happen up there? So we would meet with people and try to figure out what was the best. There were a lot of plans that were put forward, And I was kind of in the middle of that.
You were in the Kane administration during the re-election period.
I'm sorry, I just think of this really funny story.
Go ahead, tell the
It's
story.
Tom Kane.
Tell the story.
It was one of the first, I was really pretty new at being cabinet secretary, and I walked in to give him a briefing on Liberty State Park, and he's standing up in that little office, and he always stood because it was back. And he's standing there, and I'm telling him, and he said, Jane, he said, I saw Mrs. Drive today when I was up in Hudson County. And I said, Mrs. Drive? And he said, yes, she was talking to me about Liberty State Park, and I realized that he meant Audrey Zapp because it was named, there was a drive called Audrey Zapp Drive. But it just sort of shows his sense of humor. I saw Mrs. Drive today. I was so puzzled. It took me a few minutes.
He used the little office back in the corner, not the one that the current governor uses.
No, he used the little office.
Yeah. I think most governors back in those days, Jim Florio, I believe, used that office.
I think so, yeah. I think Christie might have been the first one to use the big office as her office. And then we had, Christie Whitman, we had cabinet meetings or meetings with outside people in that room that the governor now uses for an office.
You were part of the administration during the re-election year. What's your recollection of that election? I mean, did you know he was going to win? Did you know he was going to win so big?
We thought he was going to win. I don't think anyone could have predicted the stars aligning, in the 7th house and Jupiter and Mars coming together. It was just really, we thought he was going to win. But you never go into something feeling complacent. I wasn't really directly involved in it at all. We were told to just, do good and keep it up with making sure that we gave people information they wanted and answering the letters, and the mass mailings became a big thing in those years. If you remember, we would get 2,500 postcards on auto insurance, or and there were just certain little trigger issues that we had to then figure out how we were going to answer everyone. It was really the first time I think anyone had done that in the governor's office. So we were very, very busy. And kind of watched almost from afar. We sort of saw things happen at town meetings. We saw him certainly in action, and paid very close attention because everyone was struggling to get his voice right and to get his make sure that we were saying what he would say, and reflecting his.
How did you do that?
By listening closely, by reading his speeches that he actually gave. Sometimes he'd cross out stuff. We would run down to the speechwriters and ask them if we could have whatever, if he made any markings on anything. He would sometimes mark up letters, and they became our script for the next letter. If he would write on things, sometimes he would add something, or say something that he would like to say. So we would just really pay attention and read the papers and hear what he had to say.
When he got reelected, you were then promoted to special assistant to the chief of staff?
Yes, I came downstairs. I got better. I got the oceanfront real estate with the palm trees and everything. So.
And what did you do in that role?
For really pretty much what I did as cabinet secretary. I was just really another senior aide to the governor, and we all pitched in, and we had our specific issues that we worked on and met frequently. Tried to keep things together. It gets difficult because you're so busy. I mean, you have 1,000 things burning on your desk. So you really have to make sure you keep in touch. I also, my first assignments was to run the Republican Governors Association, which was coming to New Jersey that year. And that was 1987.
Came to Plainsboro?
No, we actually had it up in Parsippany.
Okay. I'm jumping ahead some years. Okay.
Yeah.
In the 90s it came to Plainsboro.
Yeah. But we hosted that, and there were more Republican governors than there had been in a long time. And if you remember, we're sort of off for a year, so it was the next year when they all came in, and Tom Kane was chair, I believe, of the RGA at that point, Republican governors. I worked on putting together the conference for him. But he really had very specific ideas about who who he wanted to invite in terms of speakers and panels, and that was really that was interesting. And Ed McGlynn was really involved in it as well.
And I want to correct the record. What happened in Plainsboro in the 90s was the House Republicans had a huge, what do you call it, when a retreat. Mm-hmm. The House Republicans held a retreat in Plainsboro at Scannicon, and that's what I'm confusing with your RGA in Parsippany, which I also remember now that you bring it up.
Mm-hmm. And one day I went into his office and I was going over the list of people that we were trying to get to speak, and he was thinking about something about who should come, and he said, I really think we should invite Richard Nixon to come and speak. And nobody had heard from Richard Nixon for years. He hadn't come out of exile. He's living in New Jersey. He has a very unique perspective. I think he might say yes. So, only thinking about Richard Nixon from a Jules Feiffer cartoon, it was really kind of an amazing thought. And we did invite him, and he did accept. And he came and talked to the Republican governors and a few of us, aides. And it was probably one of the most fascinating, hour and a half I've ever spent in my life. I mean, this guy had been with every leader, from China and Soviet Union for the only person that really had sat down face to face. And it was Tom Kean at his finest, thinking about what he wanted to provide and how this conference would be. And one of the governors, Terry Branstad, he's governor again of Iowa, he refused to come as a child of the 60s. But it was history. I mean, it was really an amazing experience. And I was very pregnant with my second daughter, and Tom Kean called me up afterwards to meet him, and he kind of grasped my arm, and we have a picture, that's how I know, but he was grasping my arm and saying to me, "You just have the greatest governor."
Nixon said that?
He said, "Tom Kean is just the most he should be president." So it was an amazing day. But he had, David Halberstam, and he had the polling, the people that did the polls, the really famous, can't remember their names, but no, it was it's almost synonymous with the word poll. That when people took polls, that
Gallup?
Yes. Well, it wasn't Gallup, it was the other one, but I'm sorry, now it's gone.
Okay.
But I did that. It was interesting. A lot of the governors that came in.
You were his cabinet secretary. Did he have a philosophy or an approach to his cabinet that was, how much rope did he give his cabinet?
I think he gave them a lot of independence. He felt that he chose very top-notch people, and he wanted to hear what they had to say. They were the subject experts. I have to say that, I used to staff his meetings with them as cabinet secretary, and they come in one-on-one. And it was always, an interesting dialogue.
Did they come in one-on-one?
A lot of times, sometimes if they had something, they would come in. I mean, we'd have cabinet meetings, obviously, but, if they needed something or wanted to talk about something, or if there was a problem coming up, they wanted to meet with him or with the chief of staff. But when they met with the governor, I would meet with them. I would be part of that. And it was funny because one of the things I really noticed was the person that always got everything she asked for was Jane Bergio. And
why was that?
Well, for a number of reasons. I think they were in the legislature together.
She was Secretary of State.
She was Secretary of State at the time. She was a big proponent of the arts and really changed the face of New Jersey's approach to the arts, I believe. I mean, I could be, it just seemed to me that the arts became very important. It was a budget item. It was something that Tom Kean talked about in the State of the State. It was something that people understood he wanted to, build this incredible arts center in Newark. Who was talking about doing something like that at the time. And I was the person that worked on PAC, got to know people. I had Joseph Papp sat in my office and talked to me. We went to meet Paul Newman and Ellen Burst. And, nobody in the governor's office thought this was, this wasn't an issue that consumed other people in the governor's office. They had other, hot issues that they were working on. So I got to do the arts, and it was great because it was something Tom Kean really cared about. And we saw some, we had this tremendous implementation with PAC being built. I saw that happen. And that was really, Tom Kean was the driver of that with Jane Bergio and Al Felsenberg. And they were just, and yet,
Al was an assistant secretary of state.
He was Jane's sort of number 2 person over at state.
When you think of the Kean years, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 top legacy items of the Kean years, do you think? What did he do for the state?
Well, I think he made people realize that we lived in this fabulous state. To have Tom Kean get up and tell you, here's this one of the oldest families, if not in the state of New Jersey, committed to public service, and look what we have here, and this is a good place to be. And it's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's not an exit joke. It's a state that has an incredible amount of competencies and offers so much. And I think that was the sort of overall big picture, Tom Kean. I think that the arts, obviously, there's something that I was really close to, but I saw how it changed the way people thought about the arts as a way to do economic development, and as a way to, again, bring excellence to the state. The whole issue of education with calling out to people all over the country and even world to say, we want to establish good research here. And I think that a lot of people were brought in to Rutgers and other places that are outstanding scholars, that they were attracted because of that climate that was created in the Kean years. And by that leadership, I think that governor really needs to be a leader and be clear about what he's expecting, in the administration. It's a very, as you know, powerful governorship in New Jersey, and you can really kind of turn the ship with your policy and your beliefs and your leadership. And he understood that, and he understood how the legislature works and how to work with them, because a lot of it's process. He had a great person in Carrie Edwards, a wonderful person that could go and talk to the legislature. It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat. And it didn't matter to Tom Kean. People came in, both parties, and worked out issues with him. And that was something that I really thought was more typical than it was, because later it showed that it became apparent that there was a lot more partisanship and divisiveness.
But not in those days.
There were some, of course. Republicans wanted to win and Democrats wanted to win, and everyone wanted his or her own party. But once people were in place and there were issues to work on, I found that the partisanship was not so apparent as it became later.
You said you were apolitical when this job was given to you. Were you political by the end of the Kean years?
I was definitely a Kean Republican person. I mean, I still was an independent, but I really was very supportive of Kean. And I learned a lot about the whole issue, the whole political issue and process. And I felt that, you sort of understand, especially working on, when I worked on National Governors Association or Republican governors, that New Jersey was very unique in our party affiliation. What we call moderate Republicans, where a lot of times you couldn't really tell the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. Some Democrats were much more conservative in some ways than the Republicans were. Tom Kean was a person that cared about social issues and education, the environment. But I think that the Republican ideal of being more friendly to business, knowing that we need business to thrive in the state. So all that made sense to me.
As the administration was winding down, what did you think you would do?
I wasn't, well, I actually had a job offer quite early on during the last year, so I knew I had a place to go. I was really, I think, one of the few people that was that fortunate, because a lot of people were sort of, it was somebody, one of my friends said, that I worked with said, it's almost like the president of the company stood up and said, we're closing this company. Everybody seemed so surprised when the 8 years were up. They were kind of wandering around like, what happened? And I think what happens is you just get so caught up in government, especially if you stay a long time, you get caught up. But I actually was in the room both times when Barbara and Finn Casperson came to offer Tom Kean the presidency. It was just me.
Drew?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the first time I had met Finn and Barbara through the work I was doing at Waterloo for Tom Kean and the arts, and got to know them a little bit. And they said they really wanted a meeting with Tom Kean. So got on the
What was their relation to Drew at the time?
Well, Barbara was a trustee at Drew, and Finn and Barbara had been very supportive of Drew through the years. Barbara also had just pretty recently completed her PhD in English literature at Drew. She went back after she had children, and she just really loved the place and felt that, both of them felt that this could be sort of a shining star private university in New Jersey. They had so much, it had so much to offer. And so they said they wanted to meet with him, and because he was, of course he had the meeting with Tom Kean, and I staffed it, because I don't think anybody thought it was going to be any burning issue, so I got to staff it as cabinet secretary. And they both told him what they envisioned. It was during the last year of his governorship, and a lot of people were asking him what he was going to do next. A lot of speculation.
Including possibly running for the U.S. Senate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And
there was an election in 1990 coming up. I guess, yeah, there was an election in 1990 that he could have run in.
Right, and there was a lot of
against
speculation.
Bill Bradley.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
There was a lot of speculation that he was going to run for Senate, and I think he did consider it. So when they first presented this to him, I just thought, boy, they got to be kidding. But we were very polite, of course, and so was he. And
they got to be kidding, because
there's no
it wasn't
way.
big enough for him?
I just didn't see him going to Drew to be president. It wasn't something that. Maybe Rutgers, but it wasn't really, it surprised me, let's put it that way. It surprised me when they offered it, not that they offered it, because I could see where they were coming from. And he was very pleased, I'm not pleased, he was very gracious, of course. And it was very clear to me that he had no interest. That was my read of things at that point. And then about a few months later, I can't say exactly when, they came in again. And this time when he was talking to them, I'm thinking to myself, he's going to do it. Now, he didn't tell them he was, In fact, he surprised everybody, except I kind of felt he was going to do it at that point. It's the way he was talking to them, and I started to understand how it made some sense. And
how did it make some sense?
well, if you're around the governor, who just about every day people are speculating. At that point, we knew he wasn't going to run for Senate. I think for personal reasons, with his family. And he was a person who cared deeply about education, and he was going to probably have a great place, a platform to continue to talk about things that he cared about. So, it made sense. And I thought he might do it at that point, although he
Did you
didn't
have your
accept.
job offer by that point?
I think I might have, but I'm not sure. I don't
What
remember
was
the
your job?
timing.
What was your job?
I was going to Beneficial, where Finn was CEO, to work as vice president for corporate and community affairs. So I was offered a senior position and worked to basically continue to do some of the work I was doing in government, but on a different vehicle.
And that's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you left the administration, you went
Turned
to
out the lights and went up to Beneficial.
That's just, you said off camera earlier that you turned off the lights. Did you literally turn off the
Pretty
lights?
much, yeah. I pretty much did. I stayed till the very end because I had work, and I asked Finn if I could start in January, and he said yes. So, they had offered me the job, I think, in the fall, maybe October. And I asked if he would mind and I went in to see Tom Kane, and I told him, and he was very happy about it. He thought it was a great idea, great move, and nice job. And I said to him, but I'll see you through to the end if I can be helpful. And he said, that would be great. And then after Jim Florio got elected, he told me to give them whatever they needed and just, help them in any way I could. So I was running up back and forth to the transition office with books and advice.
Do you remember who you interacted with from the Florio team?
David Appleton and
right.
who's the other one?
Applebaum?
Applebaum, David Applebaum,
Right.
yes. And then there was another, there was a few of them. If I saw their names, I would remember, but.
Well, you got one.
Yes, and actually I think at least one of them was still there when I did it for Christy Whitman, so we got to talk again about transition, but it was interesting.
So what did you do at Beneficial?
I put together a grants program to make some sense for giving, so it made fit in with the mission, and Finn was very generous. He had a lot of things going on. I actually did, I was in charge of the public affairs part that reported to me, and we did the soft side of the annual report, the writing and the production of that, working with the financial people. I worked with his board of directors when they got together, helping out, whatever Finn asked me to do. I did dressage. I rode 4-in-1. Finn was a very, visionary person, so he'd be thinking way ahead all the time, and he was always interested in the state and government and what was going on federally. And
was there an element of bring down or let down coming out of government into this smaller venue?
Not really. That's not kind of how I'm made. I realized I was running really fast after the first year, and I had to slow down. So I just had to slow myself down a little bit.
The first year of
at Beneficial.
At Beneficial.
Well, not because I think that when you're in the governor's office, it's despite what people might think, you're really busy all the time. There's never a downtime, and I think the private sector is typically much slower than at least being in the governor's office or being commissioner or being regional administrator. Those the government jobs for me were very, very busy and, moving around all the time.
While you were at Beneficial, Christy Whitman ran for the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know Christy Whitman at the time?
I had met her. In fact, Governor Whitman, I remember when, not Governor Kane, I remember when she was appointed as BPU commissioner towards the end of the administration. I was cabinet secretary, and he told me about it. And I remember just reading letters that her mother had written in, which were always beautifully written. She was on the board of higher ed, and she had been involved in politics, obviously, and she always had a little something to write. And so I kind of knew the name from that. But he told me she was probably one of the finest, smartest people, and she was going places. And I remember he was, again, in that little office when he told me about her coming in. And
Did he appoint her president of the BPU or just a commissioner of the BPU?
I believe president.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
so,
definitely. She came in as a cabinet member. And because the Newark, I really only saw her at cabinet meetings, although we did have a couple of retreats. And I remember she did tell me when she was running for Senate, and I thought, oh, why? But I watched her because we were both, when I was at Beneficial, as I had been in government, I was part of the Women Executives in State Government, which were a group of women nationally. And to be in it, you either had to be a statewide elected official or report to a governor or report to a CEO if you were in the private sector. So the women in that group were women that had served in similar positions across the country. And they'd invite Christy in to speak because she was running for Senate. And so often I would see her at these events and talk to her a little bit then. And really was, as I can imagine, I was very impressed with what I saw. Thought she did a great job.
Did you support her in her campaign?
I actually registered as a Republican so I could vote for her in the primary. That was my so
primary,
she ran against Carrie
Edwards.
Yeah.
For the Senate?
For
the primary for governor.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. So I really was watching her. I didn't, as I said, we weren't friends or anything, but I was excited by her candidacy. And when I was at Beneficial, we arranged a day right before the election where she could come and...
Which election, Senate or governor?
Sorry, I'm talking about governor now. Where she could come and speak to the people. And we sort of had it outside in that beautiful, where Pfizer is now, beautiful headquarters up in PPAC. And there was a front page story of her addressing this crowd of business people right before the election, which was kind of nice.
I probably covered it.
You probably covered it, Michael. You were probably there. And I was really excited when she got elected. Having a woman governor meant something to me. It was very significant to me. I remember, waking up I have 2 daughters and a son, and I woke up my middle daughter, my little one, and she was, maybe 5 at the time. And I said, Elizabeth, our new governor's a woman. And she just said, Mommy, is that good? And I said, yeah, it's really good. And then my little son, who was 3 at the time, said to me, can men's be governor too? So it was really it was
Did you
sort
know
of
you'd go to work for her?
No. I had no idea.
How did that come about?
I offered to help her with transition as a loaned executive. And of course, that was fine with Finn. And I used to drive from PPAC down to Trenton a few days a week. And at that point, it was just the beginning. She had named Judy Shaw as chief of staff and Peter Venero as her chief counsel. But none of the other positions were filled. And we started doing listening sessions, bringing people in from different areas, health or environment or whatever. And after, I don't know how long, a couple of weeks, she offered me a couple of positions at cabinet level positions. And I really struggled over Thanksgiving. But as my husband pointed out later, I was just struggling about what position to take because I had a nice job and 2 very small kids, as well as an older daughter who was a teenager. So, it was, but anyway, that's the Christie years.
What were the positions that you were wrestling with?
Well, I'll tell you that one of them was chief of policy and planning. I won't tell you about the other 2, but they were cabinet positions.
Because that's the one you took.
Mm-hmm.
And why did you take that one?
I wanted to work with her. I had been in the governor's office, and I felt that I could be helpful to her in the governor's office. I don't think anyone else had any governor's office experience that was so far there. And I wanted to work with her. I thought it'd be really fun to work with a CEO that was a woman. You never
Was
had
it?
that experience. It was great. Are you kidding me?
What was great?
It was great working with her, first of all, just the personality. You know, talk about giving you independence if she believed in you. She was very good at that. It was fun to be, it was just fun. You know, it was fun to, it was
You
fun.
still work with her to this day?
Well,
It must have been
she's my partner, so obviously I like her. But, but you know, I didn't know her that well then, and I agreed with her on a lot of her policies. So it made my job very easy because a lot of times, or I would see something from her perspective that I could talk to her about that other people hadn't, and you know, she would see my point of view. So she agreed with me a lot. So it's very satisfying, very validating. And you know, with Kane, I really kind of he was like more of a, you know, a figure sort of, you know, up on the mountain because he had the experience and he was, you know, another generation, and you know, I was really a student learning. With Christy Whitman, it was more of an equal thing, even though she was governor, obviously, and I gave her that respect, but we were more, you know, closer in generation and in thinking.
She
And we had something
ran on a tax-cutting platform and implemented her promise quickly and fully. That's what I remember about the beginning of her administration. What do you remember about the beginning of her administration? That or something else?
Well, I remember that. I mean, I was really concerned about that because I felt that, you know, just frankly, and I've told her this, and you know, it's not like I predicted anything, but I really felt worried that people would think anything that we did, because we had to make cuts in government at that time. We were in a similar position, you know, not as quite so profound as it is now, but there, you know, that we needed to cut back on services, and I was really afraid that people would think that she was heartless because the tax cuts and the cuts that necessarily had to come in service, they wouldn't see that it was from a, you know, a policy standpoint. It was more to sort of satisfy a, you know, political thing. And I was concerned about that. So I wasn't one of the, you know, the brilliant people that figured out how she could do that. I was more the person that said, I just hope, you know, I was always worried about it, you know, that would color her.
Did it?
I think it did. Yeah, I think it did. But you know, it also showed the nation, and as again, the governor of New Jersey has this great opportunity in the first year. They're a year ahead of all the other governors, and so when the next group gets elected of governors, you have a sort of if for better or for worse, a role model of things that could be done, and so often you can capture some of the, you know, what's necessary to do. What are the hard decisions you have to make? I mean, it's interesting that Cuomo is doing a lot of the stuff that Chris Christie's doing now. I mean, I think if you remember, people around the country were looking at Christy Whitman and saying you really can cut taxes and you can, you know, continue to run government and the world doesn't come to an end. And she was getting a lot of national attention. And
was chosen to deliver the response to the President's State of the Union message after about a year being in office.
Yeah, I mean, that first year she got a lot of attention. I don't know if you remember, but she got a lot of national attention, and people were trying to emulate what she was doing. And I was working really hard because the 104th Congress, the Newt Gingrich Congress that just came in, and they were pledging, you know, this whole contract with America, and we were down there all the time working with the moderates to try to make sure that the Clean Air Act wasn't opened and up, and some of the health issues were taken care of, and you know, we were the moderate voice working with Olympia Snowe and Bob Dole and trying to get some balance in some of those things because it would really hurt New Jersey if some of that stuff happened. So.
You said that you were excited that a woman was elected governor. How did being the first woman governor of the state affect her administration, either positively or negatively or both?
Well, I think that, you know, I think it was, I think it's always difficult in Trenton if you're not an insider, if you have to figure out a way to work with people that have been there. And process is always really important. And I think it was difficult for a lot of the men that had been around for a while to see the person in charge of the Republican Party at this point as a woman. It was difficult for the Republicans, and it was difficult for the Democrats. And they would come into the room to meet with her, and there'd already be 3 women sitting there before we even started the meeting. So it was very different. When I worked for Tom Kean and when I worked at Beneficial, I was often the only woman in the room for most of my political career, my professional career. And that was usually commented on, And so it was very different when, the governor was a woman, the chief of staff was a woman, the attorney general was a woman, Debbie Poritz. We started out, if we're working on the budget or working on an issue, and a couple of times Brian Clymer, who was the treasurer at the time, would remark upon that, so it was something that was definitely it caused a little bit of I would say some process issues. Some things were just not as easy. That might have been easier if you could just sit down and talk about things gender to gender. But I think that so it was very challenging in that way, I believe.
How about in terms of policy? Sometimes you hear people say, put women in charge and there'll be no more war, or women in charge and you'll get a more sympathetic set of policies. How about in terms of policy? Did gender affect policy outcomes?
Well, it's hard. It's hard for me to say because I've only looked at policy from a woman's perspective. But I'd have to say that I do think that diverse perspectives make better policy, and so it's not so much. Really, if you have a diverse group at the table, you're usually going to end up with a better product. And I think she really appreciated that. She liked to hear she wanted to know what people thought. And, don't treat me like a rock star. Let me hear what you have to say. I want to hear you disagree. I want to hear your perspective, conservative, more liberal, from a perspective, a community perspective, from a perspective of raising children, all those things you want. And that was very important to her, getting those different viewpoints. And so lots of the people we would meet with would come in, and she would ask them, talk to them about the different issues. I don't know if you remember, there was a big issue with, this is terrible. There was an anti-Semitic black man who said, and I can't remember his name, Khalid
Muhammad.
Right. And that caused a big, obviously, for obvious reasons, a big outrage and how is the governor? This is where a governor is a leader. And we were right at that time, we were in Washington at a National Governors Association meeting, and Steven Spielberg was speaking. And she made a beeline for him and asked him if he would allow Schindler's List to be shown in the state and have panels of people talking about and reacting to it. And he said yes because, the way she asked, and he gave us some copies of Schindler's List. And we put together people from, the Christian and Jews organization, some black groups, Hispanic groups. We had panelists reacting to this film. And really a direct response to show that, we have to talk to one another and hear one another's viewpoints and be aware, of what we say. And it was some way that was her reaction. How do I teach a lesson here? Or how do I use this as a moment that we can bring people together? So, it was unique. But I think those kinds of things sometimes aren't the things that you write about. Good news is no news. And so often some of those areas where she did make those kinds of decisions weren't, they weren't really the sort of the hot issues that are easy to identify.
Well, I realize your perspectives were very different in the Kaine administration and the Whitman administration, but discounting for that, how do you compare the two administrations? How do you compare the two governorships? What was the difference between the Kaine administration and the Whitman administration?
I mean, from my perspective, I think they were not dissimilar in their approach to the world, an approach to policy, an approach to caring about people. They both were ingrained with public service and wanting to make the state better, wanting to make government better, and being leaders, natural leaders. The difference just was mostly in process, where Kaine had been in the legislature, had a tremendous relationship with a lot of the legislators that we dealt with from his time in the legislature, plus came from that time. And Christy Whitman, for all practical purposes, was an outsider and a woman. So I think that those were two pretty big handicaps in Trenton. And, I think that just made some things that should have been easy harder. That was the difference I saw. I think really in terms of policy and their approach, they're probably very, very similar.
You spent 4 years as Chief of Policy and Planning.
No.
No?
I spent about 2.5 years as Chief of Policy and Planning, and we had, one of the key areas that I worked in was in urban areas, and we were trying to do what we call this Urban Coordinating Council. We were trying to get all the departments to work around a mayor and the community leaders' plan for how they wanted to see redevelopment occur in a city. And we had a few cities that we were working very closely with the mayors and the community leaders. And she had this idea, Governor Whitman had this idea that it was time to get it out of the governor's office and really implement. And the way to do that was at the Department of Community Affairs. And that's when she asked me to become commissioner.
Who was commissioner at the time?
Harriet Durman, who had been in the legislature and came over to the governor's office to be chief counsel. And Peter Venero moved into chief of staff position. Well, he had been there already, I think. I don't remember who was chief counsel. Who was chief counsel? It was Peter was chief counsel, and then he became chief of staff. And then I guess Harriet went over and became chief counsel.
So you were filling a vacancy, or this was something that, or the governor really wanted to get you in there?
She asked me if I would do it. And she asked me if I would go and become commissioner of DCA. I mean.
And what did you say?
She asked me to do it. She's the governor. So of course I said yes. And that wasn't really ever one of the areas of my, the areas that I worked on for either Governor Kaine or Governor Whitman. We had some good people over at DCA when I was chief of policy. So it wasn't one of the departments that I had to really, work with really closely. Harriet knew state government, Harriet Durman, and she had some really good people. And then I had a person in my policy office, Elizabeth Murray, who was fabulous, and she worked very closely with Department of Community Affairs. And she knew Christy Whitman, had worked on her campaign. So it was a new area for me, housing and municipal budgets and codes and standards. And it was great. It was fascinating. And it was true that we really could do a lot. At that point, we were starting to be able to focus resources. And so the Department of Health often didn't know what DEP was doing in the same city, and we brought them all together and did some calculated redevelopment efforts, excuse me, with the mayors and, as I said, the community, maybe the churches or the community, the nonprofits support. Elizabeth, Mayor Bulwich to this day, we'll talk about that if you ask him, Mayor Cahill in New Brunswick. I worked very hard in Camden. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for the new mayor. It's tough, but we were able to make some changes and get some things done, which I feel very good about.
Did you stay as commissioner through Christy Whitman's Right up until Christy Whitman left office?
I was there. I actually stayed with Donnie DeFrancesco for a while. She had asked me to go to EPA Region 2, but it took her a while to get me there. So
once she became EPA administrator, she asked you to go to Region 2, but it took a while.
Yeah.
Okay. When you think back on her 2 terms, what are you most proud of that she did? What did she do for the state?
She, I think that she also made businesses feel that was a good place to live and work. She also, made it a point to, think about how you can attract businesses to the state, and I think we had a pretty good record of economic development. She was also very committed to, the whole issue of charter schools, and that happened in her tenure. And I obviously am most proud of the work we did in urban areas. And I think that the proof is there, and you could talk to mayors.
Which urban areas spring to mind? The ones you named a minute ago, Elizabeth, New Brunswick?
We did a lot of work in Asbury Park. We did a lot of work in Long Branch. All the things that you see now in Long Branch, we started. And we did some work in Perth Amboy, some redevelopment there with the churches. I think we, the transit villages were something we started. We built the first sustainable housing. Nobody was talking about that. We did green housing. We started an Office of Green Planning. We really tried to target resources that were needed by the people on the ground. That, what do the people in the cities need? What is their plan? And then we tried to support that with the state resources and where we could, federal and outside resources.
Another major initiative of her second term was open space preservation.
Yes. And that went hand in hand. You take the pressure off the open space by providing ways with the rehabilitation subcode, which I know it sounds boring, but I got several national awards for that, and that was all her support. Take the pressure off the open space and preserve it, 1 million acres.
Did she, I remember that she set that goal. Have we met that goal, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Close.
We're close.
Told. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the...
I noticed we stopped talking about Tom Kane, but I guess you wanted to do that.
Yes, we planned on that.
Okay.
By the way, what was their relationship? Did he play any advisory role in her
We
time
asked for
together?
advice quite a bit. Would call and ask for advice. He was busy in those days. He wasn't sitting around waiting for advice to be asked. But we did, and I think they have a very good, they have a good relationship.
He was a friend of the administration.
Yes. Yes.
When the history of the Whitman years is recalled today, a lot of times the pension bond bond issue gets brought up as a mistake, a fiscal mistake. How do you remember it, or how do you see it?
I think it was just hard for people to understand, and I think that once you have so much trouble communicating something like that to people, the people that don't understand are the ones that get to label it. And in terms of the state rating stayed high, and it was always meant to be looked at again, which it wasn't in years that followed her. I mean, just recently, the CEO of New Jersey Resources told me that he thought it was a great idea at the time. It made absolute sense, and the business people totally supported it. But I think it just wasn't something, Bob Littell didn't like it. So he was a Republican senator at the time, and he said it was wacky. And that's what caught on. What caught on was the criticism, and I think it was very hard. People said, what are we doing here? But, fiscally, according to experts, it made sense. Now, should it have been looked at the year after she left? Yes. And years subsequently? Yes. And you know, you look at it in terms of the big picture, in terms of the financial health of the state, and you make decisions. But at that time, fiscally, it made sense, according to the rating agencies. I mean, we didn't have to, you know, but it just wasn't ever sold. And optically, it didn't work for people. And it's a very easy thing.
I remember I didn't understand it then.
Yeah.
And I don't
That's what
understand
I mean.
it now.
It was so hard. That's why I have to just rely on, you know, fiscal experts. According to that's what I said. I remember saying that. I said, I don't understand it, you know, and how do you sell that? So, you know, when I say sell, or you just even educate people about it, it was very difficult. So I think that's why. But, you know, I do believe that history will see some other things, and you know, some of the things we talked about in terms of open space, 1 million acres, and some of the work in cities that, you know, like Nixon going to China, Republicans did, and I think we were very good to the cities, and really tried to help them thrive. And several of the mayors told me they really missed us when we left, you know, the Democratic mayors, because we really saw where they needed the help, and worked according to their plans. And open for business, you know. New Jersey needs to be open for business, and people need to feel welcome here. And I think, you know, a lot of times businesses leave the state because, you know, sometimes the taxes become so onerous that they feel they can't make a decent living. So then we lose the opportunity to have jobs and, you know, taxes paid by businesses.
If you had to identify a weakness of the Kaine administration or of the Whitman administration, what springs to mind?
You know, I just think it's just such hard work, and there's never enough time, and there's never enough resources. I mean, it's just really government more than anything. It's to try to get key people in the roles where they can work the best and be the most efficient. It's not a problem of the governors, it's a problem of government, and it's a problem that you can't move people around, or you can't get rid of people that don't want to work anymore. It's hard, you know. It's really, I really noticed it, not so much in the governor's office, but when I went to the department, because you have some fabulous people there that are really committed to the mission, but then you have a lot of people that just really don't want to work, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's hard to get as much done.
Because of civil service rules?
And unions, the double whammy. So it's just hard to get as much done as you would want to, because you can't put people in the roles where they can perform at their, you know, highest capacity. And I think the governors are just get really stuck with that. So there's never enough time. And I think they were both, you know, obviously I think they were both excellent governors, and I think they cared about the state. They were good leaders. They listened to people. And I think we were lucky that people of that caliber want to run for office, and you just hope that continues.
How did Christy Whitman get tagged with the label in some quarters of being imperious and distant from the people? How did that happen?
Is that a gender thing, maybe?
I don't know.
I'm not
Maybe.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure, you know. I think it might be. Because she's a very warm person. I mean, I've traveled all over with her, and I can't believe how, you know, we're in Shanghai and people stop her on the street, you know, Dubai, in Florida, you know, and she talks to people and says hello, and she's mostly by herself in airports. I mean, she doesn't look for escorts, and she's a very down-to-earth person. So I'm not sure. She looks regal, and maybe that was why. I don't know.
What have you done? Well, what did you do right after you? When did you leave the DeFrancesco administration? At the end?
2001. No, I went to EPA. I became regional administrator at EPA.
That's right.
I was a little I was a little busy then. So yeah, I went there in November of 2001. And I stayed there until the beginning of 2005. And Christy
Stayed there longer than Christy Whitman stayed.
I stayed there for an extra, about a little more than a year. She asked me if I wanted to start a business and have some fun working with policy and doing some of the stuff that we like to do, but in a different capacity. So we kind of invented this business. And we've been doing this as our 7th year. We work mostly environmental and energy. And so the EPA
Who hires you?
Who hired me?
Who are your clients?
Who hired me?
In this business?
Industry, power plants. We have an independent power plant. We have some big companies like DuPont's and the Chevrons of the world. And
they hire you to help them navigate regulatory issues?
Navigate regulatory issues. We don't go to the Hill, at all, but, there are a lot of good people that do that, and we don't lobby in the legislature, but we work with the executive branch if needed, and we help them sort of think about the regulatory process, and we're very careful. Only people that want to do better we take on. So that's part of our. It's one of our goal. One of our standards.
Is this more fun than government or less fun?
Everything's fun. It's just really what you make it. And I have a lot of fun with this because the entrepreneurial part of it is interesting to me. But, and I don't, say I wish I was still in government, because I don't. But I did love my time in government. And there's nothing like government. And I think that, as I said, from boot camp of the mailroom to being, her governor's chief of policy and planning and DCA commissioner to regional administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, it's thrilling that I got the opportunity to do these jobs and work with these fabulous people. So I think it just helped. Everything helps the next thing. And so I have this portfolio that I feel it can be useful to our clients, and I'm enjoying that.
You're probably the first person we've interviewed who has had experience in 3 governors' administrations. Before we wrap up, tell us what you have done for the current governor, Chris Christie.
Well, what I did was help with transition into the governor's and lieutenant governor's office. I was asked to do that, and that was quite an honor, and it was fun because I got to work with Carrie Edwards again, and some of the people like Wayne Hausenbach, and some of the people that were doing, and Peter Venero, and we actually were the little team that figured out how the lieutenant governor was going to be lieutenant governor, because and also made some recommendations about the governor's office based on our experience. And that's it. That's what I've done for that administration.
You're saying you were the ones who figured out that the lieutenant governor should also be the Secretary of State?
I think that was our advice, and we did. I was very. It was very interesting to work in government that way, without knowing that I had to do anything to implement this, and just to give advice. But you understand how much you have done and learned when you're able to put together, a process and some papers for the next person. And I was very. They really used it. It was, it wasn't just something they did for show. They really looked and thought about it very carefully and took a lot of our recommendations.
How do you think it's working out, the whole lieutenant governorship?
I think I think that it remains to be seen how that's going to be used. I think that role, it's obviously very new for New Jersey, and she seems great. Very energetic and passionate and committed. So I guess we'll see. That was just a sort of a line in the law. It wasn't. Nothing was spelled out about what that should be. There was no ethics code. There was no salary. There was nothing. Just there should be a lieutenant governor. So she can really, this administration can really help define that. I mean, when you think about what the Secretary of State did before Tom came, it was basically the keeper of the seal and elections. He was the one that made it into the office where the arts and the arts budget and the Arts Council were housed. And that really changed the whole nature of the Secretary of State. It was much more of a political office. I mean, Jane Bergio obviously was political, who was Tom Kane's Secretary of State, but she also had this big policy push for the arts. And that became the real highlight of the Secretary of State's office. And then it changed, you know, the next Secretary of State had a different role in the Florio administration. We had first Lana Hooks, and then we had Carol Kronheim acted for a while, and then we had Pastor Soares, who did the Money Faces One Family and diversity, and you know, he had the arts, but really much more important to him were the nonprofits and the churches and the diversity issue, and that's what he used the Secretary of State's office for. So it really is, you know, it's a constitutional office, and we have that in our, as part of our, when the governor comes in. But in terms of what you do in that office, and now I think they're doing the business, you know, economic development, and that kind of outreach, and you know, that's very valuable. You can really use it in any way, but you know, so it seems to be working.
And since your days, and even before your days in the governor's office, it's generally been organized with a chief of staff, a chief counsel, and a chief of policy and planning.
Well, Tom Kane was the first one that did a chief of policy and planning. There was always a director of policy and planning. And when Brenda Davis came in, she said she'd like to be chief. So that was
Gary
changed.
Stein
He was the
preceded
director.
her. He
Yes.
was director.
Yes.
So Brenda Davis was in a slightly elevated
Yeah, I mean, I
capacity?
think Gary Stein was pretty elevated. I mean, he was definitely an advisor to Governor Kane, and he was in the office as much as probably Greg or Gary were. But I think it was just more the perception that you had these, you know, the triumvirate.
Well, when you advised the incoming Christie administration, did you stick with that structure, or did you suggest something slightly different?
They had already decided that they were going to do a chief counsel and chief of staff. And that was the only really thing they gave us when we walked in the door. And that was Christie's, Governor Christie's decision.
So the director of policy and planning now is Wayne Hassenball, and I guess it's now slightly back to being slightly lower than the two chiefs.
I guess it could be, although I believe that Wayne is probably right in there with the governor and giving his ideas and opinions. And so, you know, you could have the most prestigious position in the governor's office, but if you're not useful to the governor and the governor's not comfortable talking to you, and if you can't walk in the door anytime you want, you could have the title, but you know, you don't really have any clout. So it becomes you want to be a person in the governor's office that can be valuable to the governor and help the governor and make sure you understand what the governor needs, but at the same time make sure the governor understands what's going on out there and not try to cordon him off from that reality or her.
Can you see yourself doing it again for another governor?
I can't really see that, but I'm just always open to possibilities. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now, and I don't really think about the future so much as today because it's all we got. So.
Well, thanks for sharing
You're welcome.
your recollections with us.
You're welcome. It was fun.